So who are JPMorgan Chase?
JPMorgan Chase has been at the center of American banking for over a century.
JPMorgan Chase are the largest American bank by market capitalization and also by various indexes and ranks. They are the largest trading public bank in the United States. As far as investment banking goes, they are one of the biggest. They are up there in the ranks of Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. JPMorgan Chase are a really large name in the world of investment banking. Now, I applied for a role at their London office in Bank Street. This role was actually an on-site role with very little option for hybrid working or remote working. So in this video, hopefully we'll cover content which is still very relevant for any roles that may be active as of today and maybe going live from tomorrow onwards with JPMorgan. Now, JPMorgan Chase don't just do investment banking, they do banking in other areas as well. They're very popular in the US, especially for their retail banking arm, which is known as Chase. And Chase is now active brand here in the UK as well. JPMorgan are also active in a number of other lines of business as well, which includes corporate banking or commercial banking. They're also active in wealth management and they're also active in world trade finance. So that's just a little bit about JPMorgan, who they are, and the context of which this video is about. Now, the role that I applied for is based within their investment bank, as I mentioned earlier. It's actually a role that sits within a product team. And the role is actually a hybrid role in the sense that it's half business, half technology. And what you'll find generally in investment banks is that have one of these two roles, one which is on the business side and one which is on the technology side. This particular role that I applied for is at a senior associate level. So you have a number of different roles within a bank and a hierarchy which exists. And at JPMorgan, typically you start off at an analyst level, then to an associate level, then to a VP level or vice president, and then you have what's known as an executive director, and then finally above executive director you have what is known as a managing director. Now, in between these different roles there exists some halfway points which is certainly applied in my case as a senior associate. So this is a role between associate and vice president. Now, this is what surprised me about the interview process. Now, typically the more senior the role that you go for, the more stages of interviews you can expect. Now, for my role, which I wouldn't consider that senior at the time, a senior associate, I actually ended up doing 5 interview stages. The first interview stage was with my hiring manager, who is an executive director. The second interview stage was with another executive director in treasury. The third interview was with a managing director in the investment bank. The fourth interview was with my line director, so my boss's boss. He's also an executive director. And then finally, I did an interview with HR, which is really an informal interview, but nevertheless, it was structured formally. Now, I'm not going into too many specific details for every single stage that I did. What I can talk about are some of the general kind of questions that were asked, which I think are important to know. So firstly, anything that you put on your CV, you can guarantee will be questioned in the interview. So in investment banking, if you talk about and demonstrate your knowledge of different markets, you talk about bond market or equities market, you talk about foreign exchange, you can pretty much guarantee you will be asked questions around those topics if you mention them on your CV. In my case, I wasn't, because my background was primarily in commercial banking. Nevertheless, there were a number of technical questions that came up during the interview process. So one of the technical questions I got asked was around my knowledge of RWA, which is risk-weighted assets. It's a metric which is used to determine how one calculates risk. And it's a regulatory metric as well, especially in the world of banking. So in my example, I gave a clear understanding of what I understand about RWAs. I also talked about the different components of RWAs, and I used some examples as well. Now, although it isn't specific to investment banking, my knowledge in that particular area was something that was recognized by the person interviewing me. Some of the questions you'll be asked would typically involve how you manage your day-to-day kind of operations or how you manage your day-to-day role. So in my case, previously I worked with a number of different global teams, and they'll very much want to hear about that because JPMorgan are a global bank. Although they are headquartered in the US, they have a large global footprint. So you want to talk about how you work with different teams, how you work in an agile way, what kind of tools you use, how you work with them on a day-to-day basis. You may have daily stand-up calls, you may have weekly meetings, you may have working groups which are specific to different projects. These things factors are really good to talk about, especially when it comes to JP Morgan, because they also work in a very similar way. JP Morgan are a bank which invest heavily in their technology, so you can guarantee you'll be asked questions around your technology knowledge, and that's important to bring it up during the interview stage. So in my case, I previously used tools like Tableau. I previously coded in Python. I've used and coded in SQL. I'm also familiar with tools like Jira and Confluence. These are all tools which are used currently at JPMorgan Chase. If you have examples of where you've used different tools, coding languages, programs, applications, it'd be a great time to demonstrate your knowledge in an interview. And a bank like JP Morgan is very forward thinking. You'll find out and you will learn soon enough that they are heavily involved in the world of AI. They've got their own artificial intelligence, which is currently undergoing development and early release. They're also heavily invested in cloud computing as well, and particularly AWS, especially when I was working there. I found AWS to be their platform of choice, especially when it came to cloud computing. One question I was asked was about automation. So automation is something I've done previously in my roles, and automation is something I'm really passionate about. So it's important to kind of demonstrate pockets of excellence and experiences where you feel like you've naturally stood out as a strong person, or you had a really strong affinity for something in particular. To demonstrate these will really get you recognized, especially during the interview stage. Now, interestingly, my discussion with the most senior person during the interview process is a lady who was an MD, and today she's actually more senior now. Now, the conversation I had with her was perhaps the most business savvy conversation I had of all interview stages during the process. My discussion with this lady was more about the business side of things in terms of how I manage a book of work, how we manage clients, how we grow a business, and what kind of measures of success I would typically use to track in business. She also discussed how we would structure a team. If I had the chance to organize a team, how would I do that? So these are really high level strategic kind of business questions that were asked by the MD during the interview process. I actually found some of the other interviews, the more junior ones with executive directors, were actually more difficult interviews, because the general questions that were asked during those kind of interviews were far more technical. Now, JP Morgan are a bank that like to see leadership in the people they hire. So if you can demonstrate your experience of leading projects or leading teams, even if you didn't manage to succeed in certain aspects or certain projects, it's really good to demonstrate that knowledge and that experience. And you need to come across as an all-rounder, because JP Morgan are a large, diverse bank, and they want to be hiring people who tick many boxes. They want to be hiring people who are talented in more areas than one, and for you to demonstrate that will be really important. So in terms of questions that you should be asking that I would prioritize are questions more around the priorities of you going into the role. What would be the short-term objectives, or if I was to go into the role, what are the objectives of the team in the next 6 months, the next 12 months, the next 24 months? This is a perfect question to ask. Another question you can ask is, what are the measures of success? If I was to come into this role, what would define me as a successful person if I was to deliver on A, B, C, X, Y, Z? This is another great question to ask, especially to your line manager. Finally, the other big thing that I would highly demonstrate is your knowledge of different areas of the investment bank. So investment banking isn't just all about trading. There are many aspects in different teams and divisions. There are many teams within investment banks that work together to deliver and service clients. So one example would be regulatory operations. Another example would be treasury. Another example would be finance or central finance. Another example would be QR or quant research, who are responsible for doing a lot of the technical work. You also have technology, of course. And then within the business side, you have a number of different departments. You have security services, you have asset management, you have prime brokerage, you have global clearing, you have execution. There are many, many different teams within an investment bank, and it's important that you read up about them and how they work with each other. And if you can demonstrate that in an interview with JPMorgan Chase, you'll do yourself really well. So all my interviews were held virtually, online. I wasn't fortunate enough to go in and present myself, but nevertheless, treat it like you are in a serious meeting. So what I would suggest is that you present yourself really well, you dress up really smart, which I shouldn't have to mention, but treat every single interview like a serious interview. It is okay to have icebreakers and have some off-topic kind of discussions which are friendly in nature. That kind of improves the rapport that you'll have with the person interviewing you. And also, it's important that you dial in early. Make sure you check the quality of your video, make sure you check the quality of your sound. These will be really important, especially when you're presenting. One thing you can do that I've never done before, but I think would be acceptable, is to share your screen and talk about project work that you may have. Could be something that you developed, something that you coded. It would be really impressive to showcase some of that, especially if a conversation naturally flows into a scenario when you're able to share that. The other big thing I would mention is what you're looking to get out of investment banking. Now, a lot of people who go into the field of investment banking are mainly doing it for the financial benefit. But if you can demonstrate and explain in a really nice way what you're looking to get out of investment banking as much as what you're looking to put in, you'll do really well. So for instance, you may talk about career progression, you may talk about your personal development, what you're trying to learn in investment banking, how world markets typically work. You may want to talk about having exposure to hedge funds, you may want to talk about having exposure to big clients who are trading global markets. You may even want to talk about the international kind of footprint that investment banking typically has, and your exposure to different people in different parts of the world who you'll be working with and who you'll be serving. Now onto some of the logistics around the process. I applied for a role in early November. I had my first interview at the end of November and my second interview in December. I then didn't hear anything over Christmas, but come January, I had my third interview and my fourth interview by the end of January. And by early February, I had my final interview, which was with HR, and that resulted in an offer of employment. So one thing you'll note straight away is that the interview process can be really long. There's no quick interview process, especially JPMorgan, and budgets are constantly changing. So with a bank like JPMorgan, you may find that a role comes available, but in 6 months' time, that role may be taken away. What I will say is that if you are in the interview process already, do be patient, because it can take a number of months before you complete through the interview stages. And then guys, in February came the news that I really wanted to hear, and I was offered the role in February 2022 with a start date in April 2022 of that year. The interview process at JPMorgan is quite difficult. It involves many stages. You will need a lot of energy, but it can be done if you reflect on every single stage you go through and you stick to your strengths and you talk about your strengths. You can succeed in an interview with JPMorgan Chase. If you are successful and you do get that offer letter, you will find that your contract is signed off by none other than Jamie Dimon himself. So guys, that wraps up the interview process at JPMorgan Chase. If you have or you are about to apply for a role at JPMorgan Chase, then absolutely go for it. They're an amazing bank to work for. They're one of the biggest names in the world of finance. The interview can be daunting, but hopefully this video has given you some ideas on what to talk about and how to approach the interview. And more than anything, I wish you all the very best. If you are applying for a role or if you do have interviews at JPMorgan Chase, I really hope that you absolutely nail those interviews and you are successful in your application. Thank you for watching, guys. Do like, comment, and subscribe. If there's anything else that I can help with or anything else you want to learn about, drop a comment in the comment section and I'll be sure to check it out. Take care, guys. Thanks for watching.